Hey y'all, so if you are a fan of the movie Waiting to Exhale, I'm sure one of the things that you remember from that movie is that dress worn by Lela Rochon, aka Robin. That white dress that she wore to that party with Troy. Oh, that's one of my favorite dresses. So I told myself I'm going to make that dress one day once I learn how to use the sewing machine. So I went on down to a fabric store here in Oklahoma City and looked through all their fabrics. As you can see, I found different kinds. I feel like the dress that she wore was some type of linen fabric, but I knew I wasn't going to find anything like that. So I found something that I knew I could work with. And this fabric was like a blend of polyester, spandex, and rayon. Had a good weight on it, so I went ahead and got that. Also, I got me some tracing paper from the store. This nice man there gave me 2 large rolls of paper for $4. Very nice. I'm going to go there again. But anyways, now I'm home getting the paper cut out. To trace the pattern, I took a dress from my closet that I felt was the shape of the dress and traced around that. As you can see here, I'm using rulers to make sure that my lines are kind of straight, as straight as I can get them. The dress is a bit shorter than I want the dress I'm making to be, so I went down a little longer. I think I made the dress about 65 inches long. And it helped me stay on track with what the dress should look like. I printed out pictures of the dress and I put it on the wall so I don't have to keep looking at my phone. So this dress has 6 different sections that are sewn together. And what you see me doing right now is creating the 3 different sections. Now, as I'm looking at it now, I knew that I made that middle section way too wide, but hey, this is my first time, so give me some grace. And I'm just cutting out each of those sections because I'm gonna then attach them to the fabric. Now I'm getting my fabric all laid out on the table. I made sure that I doubled the fabric because once I put the patterns onto the fabric, when I start cutting, I'm cutting both the front and the back side of the dress at the same time. That's the whole point of doubling the fabric, if you didn't know. Now I'm going to pin the patterns onto my fabric, so when I start cutting the fabric, both sides of the fabric will be symmetrical. And to make sure I didn't get confused, I labeled the left and the right sides of the dress. That's just for me. You don't have to do that. Now what I'm doing is I'm turning the fabric from the right side to the wrong side, and then I'm going to pin them together. With this type of fabric, it was hard for me to tell what was the wrong side and what was the right side. Usually the right side is the prettier side of the fabric, or if you have a printed fabric, that will be the right side, and then the wrong side will of course look like it's on the inside of the fabric, or it's just not as nice. So that was pretty hard to tell. But now I'm going to sew the area where the shoulders of the dress are together. One thing you want to make sure you do with a dress like this is you want to make sure that you take care of each section before you get to another section. And me sewing the shoulders together first helps this dress stay in place in order for me to add the next section of the dress to it. So what you see me doing here is adding the left part of the dress to the middle section, if that makes sense. I am pinning it together so that when I sew it, it'll be easier for it to stay together. And here's a closer look at what it looks like after I've pinned the left side to the middle section. And after I sewed it, this is what it looks like. And this is the right side of the dress, not the inside that I'm actually sewing on. So you see me measuring here how far I want to go down, because as you can see, this dress has cutouts in the midsection and you only want to sew down but so far. Now here's video of both the left and the right side sewed together. Now before I sew anything else on this dress, I want to make sure that I press down the edges of the dress where I'm going to make the seams. I did this on each side of each section of the dress before I did any more sewing. And this is to make sure that once I sew everything together, I don't have to clean up the edges as much. And just to clarify, I'm sewing all the way to the bottom of the dress on each side of each section. What I'm doing next is I'm measuring from the top of my shoulders all the way underneath my boob, because that is going to be the top section of the dress before I start the cutout. And you can actually do this part before you start to sew the pieces together, but this is literally my first time making a dress from raw fabric, so I'm literally learning as I go. To make things easier for myself, I went ahead and pinned the measuring tape on the wall next to the dress. And that helped me see the measurements so much better than how I was doing it. And as you see here, I'm seam ripping stitches out, which I did a lot of seam ripping with this dress, because even though it looks like an easy dress to make, it is not, okay? This area that I'm working on is where the middle cutouts will be. Now I'm about to flip this dress to the right side so that I can start to tie the middle knot. And I'm going to start with the middle knot first on the front and the back side. First of all, you would think making a knot is easy, but it is not, because you want to make sure when you tie it that the inside of the fabric is not exposed. So it took me a couple of times to get the knots down. And that's me flipping it to the back so that I can tie the middle back knot. Now I'm gonna tie the side knots. Okay, now I'm all finished and I'm gonna go ahead and try it on. That is something that will be good for you to do so that you can make sure that it's fitting how you need it to fit, that the knots are in the areas that you want the knots to be at before you start to sew the middle section of the dress together. For the cutouts, I want to make sure that they are all pretty much the same shape and the same length. I made the cutouts about 4 inches wide for the diamond shape cutout, and what you see me doing here is making sure that I have that measurement down correct before I pin the middle sections and the side sections together. Now I'm just doing some more measuring as far as how far I want the cutout to come up on my leg. This part is one of the hardest parts of making the dress because it takes a lot of adjustments. Even though I call myself measuring everything, I still had to make a lot of adjustments to this dress and do some seam ripping. But I got it all sewed together, and as you can see, it's still open on the side. I didn't want to sew this whole dress together until I got all my knots tied, and I felt like that was the best way of going about it so that if I did make a mistake, I didn't have to do a lot of seam ripping. But yeah, now I'm to the point to where I can tie the bottom part of the dress, which I was so happy because it was taking a long time to get this thing done. Now I'm going to start tying the back side. Okay, so now it's time for me to sew that open side together, which I have, and I'm gonna finish tying the knots on the dress. Okay, now it's time for me to focus on the bottom part of the dress, and as you can see, those edges were horrible, so I'm Gonna fold them to where they're all the same length and get them sewed and cut so that I can move on to the neckline of the dress. Now, as you can see, that is raw. Those edges are raw. And I'm gonna add binding to the neckline of the dress. This is not an easy process. I honestly wish I didn't do it because it just took forever. It seems like it'll be an easy thing, but adding binding for me, especially since I barely know how to sew straight, is very hard to do. Binding is just like something that you add to a raw edge so that it can look finished. And there's one part of the binding done. And now I'm gonna do my second piece so that I can add the front binding and the back binding to the neckline. Now my binding is done and I'm ready to add it to the neckline of my dress. Now finally my dress is finished and I can finally try it on for you guys.